Last year alone, in 1 year, 2015, Bloomberg Philanthropies donated $500 million. And over his lifetime, including his personal giving, he's distributed an unbelievable $4.5 billion, and still counting. More than $1 billion of which to his fortunate alma mater, Johns Hopkins, whose board he chairs. He leads bipartisan coalitions on immigration reform, climate change, infrastructure investment, and on gun control and gun safety. In 2014, the UN Secretary General appointed him as Special Envoy for Cities and Climate Change. I want to close with a few personal notes, because there is a personal quality to tonight's event, unlike any that I've had over 27 years. He grew up just a few stone throws from my wife's home in Everett, and Fran's sister, my sister-in-law, Naomi Schwartz, has come down from Massachusetts for tonight's event. Michael's sister, Marjorie Tiven, was one of Fran's dearest friends. She served for 12 years on a $1 a year basis as New York City's Commissioner for the UN Consular Corps and Protocol and Lunch and Ambitious Sister Cities Initiative. And we've often enjoyed Passover Seders at her home in Manhattan with Michael. In 1991, when my youngest son, Brian, who is here with my oldest son, Jay, thanks to Marjorie, got the break of his life. He was at the Jewish Day School in suburban Washington, and the kids graduate in January and then go to Israel for the next semester. But Saddam Hussein had other thoughts, and he was lobbing Scud missiles into Israel, and the trip had to be postponed. What to do for Brian Eisenstadt? Thanks to Marjorie, she was able to arrange an internship at the new Washington office of Bloomberg News, but it had about 6 people. And that launched Brian as he worked several summers on a career in finance. And my daughter-in-law, Erin, worked for several years in his administration with the NYPD and the Counterterrorism Bureau. I want to close with a very personal perspective on Michael as a person and his relationship with his family, especially his late mother Charlotte, who passed away recently at age 100 plus or minus. His generosity made possible the stunning new Charlotte Bloomberg Children's Hospital at Johns Hopkins. But I want to tell you about his connection with Israel, because it overlaps with his devotion to his mother and father. He has donated millions of dollars to improve Israel's medical services, dedicated to his mother a special mother and children's wing at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, and took his mother, who was then 90 plus, over with Marjorie to dedicate it. He has expanded dramatically Jerusalem's Magen David Adom Emergency Health Service in honor of his father, William H. Bloomberg. And it is now the premier emergency ambulance and blood and disaster relief organization. The first responder for Israel's 8 million people, saving lives on a 24/7 basis. In 2014, when the Obama administration temporarily banned U.S. air carriers from flying to Israel because of missiles coming from Gaza, which were reaching Ben Gurion Airport, to show his solidarity with Israel in the midst of these attacks, and in his own words, to avoid giving Hamas an undeserved victory, he took an El Al flight from JFK and went straight to the Prime Minister's office. Indeed, Michael Bloomberg is a remarkable Renaissance man. And Michael, you do my late wife Fran and my entire family great honor by coming here this evening. Thank you. format, instead of having a set speech, Michael's interests are so remarkably broad that we thought we wanted to bring to you in a conversational form some of the thoughts that he has on a whole wide range of them. So Michael, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start.
Seeing you, I don't think my mother would have recognized who you were talking about. Probably would have said you shouldn't have abbreviated so much.
So let's start at the beginning. In Medford, Mass., I know that area well. It's a working class suburb. What sort of values did your father and mother instill in you and Marjorie that helped lead to this extraordinary career?
Well, I've always said if I screw it up, it's not my parents' fault. I remember them as very hardworking. One of the things they did that really made a difference in my life, and I think in my sister's as well, my sister and I set the dining room table. My mother did the cooking, although she had never seen a kitchen that she liked. Everything was out of a can. And my father helped in cleaning up afterwards, but when we sat down at the table, we would go around the table and talk about what we did that day in an order so that everybody, it was a chance to talk about broad issues and to get to become closer together, I think, but really to express ourselves. And one of the things that I've always thought, television has been one of the worst things that's happened, particularly to the poor communities, because people watch television rather than sit there and talk, and then you don't have the ability to teach your children values. But we learned ours at the dining room table. They were interested in philanthropy. I remember one time my father, with great pride, he had a book that listed all the donations to whatever the charity was. This case it was the NAACP. And he said, oh, Joe gave $100. He could have afforded more than that. And, we're not criticizing. And I think he gave $50. And I remember saying, why did you give money to the NAACP? And he said, because discrimination against anybody is discrimination against everybody. And those are the
I think it's fair to say there's no single individual who's done more for his or her alma mater and university than you have done for Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. What was there about your experience at Hopkins that created such a devotion and dedication that you've given over $1 billion to the university? You chaired their board for a number of years. What was there about Hopkins that led you to this quite extraordinary effort?
Somebody once said that they're going to put up 3 statues. One to Johns Hopkins, one to me, but the biggest one to the admissions officer that took me. How I got in after being a straight C student at Medford High School, I have absolutely no idea. No, I think the scholarship at Johns Hopkins is unique. They gave me an opportunity. What they did was they, I think as much as anything, taught me what I don't know and what I'm not able to do. I went there to study physics in 1960. And it turned out there was a mandatory German requirement. 3 days in German class, I transferred to the engineering school. There was no question I wasn't going to learn to speak German. But in the engineering school, I was able to regurgitate what was in the books, but I realized I would never be able to write the books. And so that was not the career that I wanted, but I will say that studying as an engineer, because you learn how to think logically and sequentially and test all the time everything you think and you say, was as good a background as you could possibly have, no matter what kind of occupation you did, even if it's raising a family or becoming a rocket scientist, whatever it is. I thought that the education I got there in terms of dealing with people, it was for those days, a reasonably diverse community. And I, to this day, think that whether it's in science or the arts or in medicine or in public health, to me, Johns Hopkins stands out as one of the best. And there's certainly plenty of great universities and plenty of great faculty, and they all move around and they get rated differently each year. but Hopkins was the right place for me, and I think it's the right place for a lot of people. And it's unique in the fact that it is an educational institution, but it is also a research institution par excellence. And what they do helps people around the world, not just those who matriculate there.
So I hope none of you have to go for medical reasons to Hopkins, but it's been rated by U.S. News and World Report for, I think, over 20 straight years as the #1 hospital in the country. My wife, Fran, got incredible care there, and the contributions that Michael has made to Hopkins are one of the reasons that it has maintained itself as such a premier institution. So let's go to your business career. You started with physics, and that didn't work out. You started with engineering. How did you decide to go into finance?
Well, there wasn't much else left to do. I was scheduled, seriously, in 1966 in May. I was headed to Vietnam. I had a place in Officers Candidate School, and I thought you'd be safer as a second lieutenant in Vietnam than as a private. Little did we all know it was exactly reversed. But I thought that it was the right thing to do. Nobody in those days, it wasn't like here. We didn't burn our draft cards. We didn't go to Canada. If you got drafted, you went. And so this was what I was going to do. And then in May, a month before graduation, I went for my physical, and I had perfectly flat feet. At the Museum of Science, they can measure it. Nobody's ever set the bar that low for an artist. And so I needed a job, and a friend of mine, Steve Fenster, who'd been a McNamara whiz kid, Phi Beta Kappa at Harvard College, Baker Scholar at Harvard Business School, we were classmates, and he said, go to Salomon Brothers and Goldman Sachs, and apply for a job. And I said, who are they? What do they do? He said, just do it. If you ask me where you should go to dinner tonight, and I tell you, and I run into you tomorrow, and you didn't go where I recommend, I'm furious. Why waste my time if you're not going to take my recommendation? So, of course, I took Fenster's recommendation. Goldman offered me a job for $14,000 a year, which was a lot of money in 1966. Solomon offered me a job for $9,000, as I remember, and I said I just felt I fit into Salomon Brothers better than I fit into the Goldman Sachs, and so I said to Salomon Brothers, John, good friend at the time, you know, I'd love to come here, but I can't afford to come. I had a schedule, and I showed him. It was $120 a month for rent, and $5 for food, and 30 cents for the subway up and downtown, and 50 cents for newspapers, whatever it was, and it just didn't work. And he said, well, how much do you need? And I didn't want to be piggy, so I said, $11,500. I just picked the number out of the blue. And he said, fine, $9,000 salary, $2,500 loan, and he got up and he walked out of the room. It's a true story, and if anybody doesn't believe it, I have the note at home. That September 30th, my first year's bonus for half a year was $500 forgiveness of the loan. And the next year, it was the other the balance, $2,000 forgiveness. Both places John had signed, and I still have the document. Just in case he comes back and says, you did that.
Now, there's actually an important lesson for all the young people who are starting their careers, and if I may say, I think also for adults, that even the most successful people have bumps in the road in their career that have to be overcome. And you had one. In 1981, Fibro Corporation bought Solomon. And if I can put it undiplomatically, I think you were fired.
Right on. It should happen to you.
So tell us about that, and was it a devastating experience, and how did you pick yourself up?
Well, I don't remember it being devastating. It was time to go, I thought. They certainly thought so.
Well, what was there about?
The company was changing, and they were bringing in people from outside, and I've always believed in growing internally, and particularly in management. And the only thing I was worried about was that my then wife, the mother of my two daughters, and she's still a very close friend of mine, my ex, but I was worried that she would feel that we weren't going to be able to eat, and have to give up the apartment, and, you know, nobody was ever going to talk to us again. So the next day I went out and I bought her a mink coat. The first time she ever had a mink coat. And I walked in to buy it, and the guy said, well, what kind? I said, I don't know, I want a mink coat. One mink coat, another mink coat, what's the difference? And he said, what style? I said, look, whatever it is, she's going to bring it back, and then you'll get her whatever she wants. And it turned out okay, she did get a mink coat that she liked, I think. But I didn't have a problem. It was in August, I had to work until September 30th to finish our fiscal year, and I made sure I was there every day. I always went in at 7 in the morning, always stayed till 7 at night anyways, just what I always did. And I always wanted to be the first one in, so that when Billy Solomon came in, if he needed to borrow a match or find out who won the football game last night, he had to talk to me, and he said he became my friend and my rabbi from day one, and then I always wanted to stay at the end of the day, because that's when the number 2 guy in the company, John Goodfriend, would leave, and I made sure I was on the same elevator downstairs with him. What was he going to do, refuse to share a subway car with me? And so he became my other rabbi, and I have nothing but great things to say about both of them. I said Goodfriend's memorial service that I thought, I think it was Billy Solomon's memorial service, but I could have said either one, that I learned more from those 2 guys about management, how to deal with people, than I did with 2 years at Harvard Business School. Because I watched them, they had rules that applied to themselves, they had rules that were based on character and what was right rather than what was good for the bottom line. And I've never seen a firm that is as honest. I haven't been inside any other than my own, in all fairness. But my perception is there's no firm that is as honest as Solomon Brothers was in those days. And those are the 2 guys that really set the ethical standard. It wound up, they weren't really talking to each other, and then later on they realized, I think, they were both going to be in the ground at the same time, and they sort of died within a year of each other. They sort of put it back together. Shame a lot of these people, why do you have an argument? You are going to be together eventually, so suck it up and enjoy life together. But it was, and I think if Goldman had called me and said, we want you to be a general partner and run this, that, the other thing, I probably would have said yes. But they didn't call, and soliciting's undignified. I wasn't going to run and look for a job. So I said I was going to start my own company, and I asked them, would they have any interest in investing in it? And they said, no, go ahead and do what you want.
So where did you get the idea for what became Bloomberg LP? What niche? I mean, was it just something that just sort of came to you overnight? Or how did...
In the early 70s, I started at Solomon when I got out of school in '66. Early 70s, I went to Billy Solomon. I said I had read about something called a computer where you could take data and put it in, and then if you needed it, you hit a button and it would come out. And when somebody came with a block of stock, when I started on the trading desk, or eventually wound up running it, but when I started, I had 10 newspapers to go through and write down the last sale of the stock for 10 days so we could draw a little chart. I went to a book to find out what the company did. I went to holding lists, and we tried to pull it all together. And I thought if we took all that information the night before, put it in, and then hit a button to get it out, it would be much quicker. And Billy said, that's a great idea if you got time at night, work on it, but you got a day job. And in those days, you didn't get extra money for doing extra. You were expected to do extra. And I will say I have little in common with those people who think, well, if I do a little bit more, they should change my salary, my compensation. You're supposed to work hard. If Solomon hadn't fired me, I would still be working for them. The remnants of that company are part of Citibank. My girlfriend is on the board of Citibank, so I would be working for her. No, I wouldn't. But yeah, I would never quit from a company. There's no reason to quit in good times, and in bad times, you should never quit from a company. They gave you a job, and when they need you, you should be around. And you talk about ethics, that's what my parents, I think, taught my sister. 2 weeks ago, I was playing golf, and this guy said he had to give a speech to a bunch of college students. What should he talk about? And I said, maybe you should ask the millennials what they're annoyed about. For God's sakes. Poverty has been cut in half in the last 4 decades in the world. Our poor are still poor and need a lot of help, but they've made a lot of progress, and we should certainly continue to do that. These kids aren't working while they're going to school. I always had a job. My parents took out another mortgage on the house when my sister and I went to school. Thank God Sputnik was launched, because then there were these National Science Foundation, National Defense loans, I think they were called. And I got a loan and eventually worked hard and paid it all back. And, you know, I had to write my own letters. I didn't get a job because I knew anybody. And so somehow or other, I think our young people are being a little bit too coddled in school, from elementary school, kindergarten, all the way up. Somebody might feel that they are worse than somebody else. Yeah, you are. I gave a commencement speech at Michigan this year, and there was 60,000 people in the stands, 6,000 undergraduates, and I talked about trigger warnings and safe spaces and microaggressions, and I said, yeah, microaggressions, that's what they are. They're micro. And from across the stadium, this guy stood up and said, go to hell, except that wasn't the way he phrased it. I loved it.
So, Michael, plenty of people have ideas that never go anywhere. How were you able to take this idea of computerizing all this data so people could follow stocks and make it a worldwide enterprise? What type of marketing, leadership, and perhaps this gets into the question of what leadership is all about?
Well, I think number one, people that are successful think they're smart, and I think they're lucky to be included. We started at the right time, but if we had zigged instead of zagged, it wouldn't have turned out that way, and I wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be asking the question. I think that what happened with our luck is we did something that nobody else did, so the competition at the beginning wasn't there.
And explain again for people, what is it you did that others aren't doing?
What we did is we built a computer system, although it was before PCs were invented. I know most of you don't think there was a day like that, but there was. We actually had to make our own hardware. It was before Al Gore invented the internet. We had our own communication system or whatever. But we took data and we stored it and we let you retrieve it in different ways and do some things to display it, graph it, chart it, use calculations in it. On the data and that sort of thing. And up until then, people at best, even when they had a computer system, and there were some, Telerate was one company, Reuters was another, they had systems that stored data, but you couldn't do anything with it. And they didn't think there was a great demand for doing with it until it was too late for them to catch up. So we did first use mover advantage is one thing. Number two, I think that the ethic of the company we have, as you joked about before, everybody, including me, has the same size desk. Everybody, including me, is out in the open in a bullpen. I ran City Hall that way. My job as a manager is to get people to work together and to take away distinctions. So no titles in the company. If we give you a title, all of a sudden you think you're better than you were, and you go looking for a higher paying job, and he didn't get the title, so he's annoyed, he's leaving. What's the point of a title? You know who you work for, he knows who he works for, let's get on with it. When I got there was supposedly, I had a rule while I was away, no offices, and there weren't any offices, but a number of the senior people in the company had conference rooms right next to their desks, and in the conference rooms there were family pictures. So literally the next Monday when they came in, the walls were no longer on those offices. So I had the glass taken out of all of them. And then I discovered a month later maybe, some people had bigger desks than others. That I hadn't heard of before. And when they came in Monday, everybody's desk was the same. But you have to have the right people, you have to incent your people, you have to give them recognition and respect, you have to have them believe that the customer is who we work for. We have some policies. I've always been a believer that customers are never very good at describing what they do, much less what they will need down the road. And so conventional wisdom is listen to your customers. I would phrase it, you want to hear your customers out because some of them really do have some good ideas, but then you have to go and build what you think they're going to want down the road and then sell them on using it. And hopefully, if you're right, you'll be successful, and if you're wrong, you won't. But nobody's going to, even no matter how honest they are, they're not going to realize, they're not going to describe something that will hurt what they're doing. They're not going to disrupt their own lives. And so disruptive technologies have to be shown to them and created for them rather than them being the driving force.
So you made another big bet after starting and beginning to have some success with Bloomberg LP and the Bloomberg terminal, which you described. And that is you decided with no press background at all to open Bloomberg News. And there's an interesting story I'd like you to share when you asked Matthew Winkler about whether he thought you should get into the news business, and he gave you a bit of a test about how it might affect the terminal.
Yeah, Winkler worked he was a senior reporter at the Wall Street Journal and was assigned to write a story on Bloomberg. And it was a great story, picture above the fold, right-hand column where you want to be in the newspaper. And a month later I called him up and I said, I want to start a news service because we've always been in the news business. It's just up until then we distributed news in the form of numbers or charts and tables or calculations, and print is just another way of distributing information. Sometimes you want numbers, sometimes you want words. And so he said, well, we'll talk about it. And I took him to a Japanese restaurant across the street, and we talked about it. And his big test was, he seemed very enthusiastic, but he said, what happens if there's a story that we have to write that will not be well received by your biggest customer? And I said, you write the story, and end of story. And he started working a month later, whenever he could get out of the Wall Street Journal. And the first time he found out what he was getting paid was his first paycheck 2 weeks later. We never discussed his compensation. Never. And I keep giving talks to kids, and I say, you know, you're getting out of school, forget about how much money you're going to get paid. It's never going to be enough, number one. And number two, you're going to have lots of different jobs, unfortunately, in this day and age, going forward. Where do you take the job that will teach you the most? And Matt wanted the job that would give him the greatest challenge. And 25 years later, when I got back, I said, okay, you've been doing this for 25 years. Now news is not only numbers and words, but it's also pictures and moving pictures and sound. And we have to distribute it in print and in lots of different languages and that sort of thing. You've been doing it for 25 years. When I had done my job for 20 years, I went off to City Hall. It's 25 years with you, you should be doing something else in the company. So now he's doing something else in the company, and he's happy as hell, writing big stories, interviewing people, really thinking and being a great advisor. So the guy that I brought a guy in who had been the editor of The Economist, John Micklethwaite, and pulled together all of the different news organizations. And I restructured the news business. I think it's a good lesson for any company. I think we did the right thing. Companies tend, and governments tend, to be organized for what is easiest for the head of their organization to manage. So you have the mayor, and then you have these different siloed functions, the police department, the fire department, human resources, homeless, whatever. But out in the world there is a customer who needs lots of those services. And yet you've structured it so you can't really service one customer. What you want to do is you take all of these and have one point of contact with a customer. And so we took our radio and television and internet and magazines and conference business and the print business and the computer-generated story business, whatever. And I put all of the managers of those groups in one circle around where the new guy was coming in, so he didn't have to do the reorg. I wanted to do it before he got there. And then mixed up all of their people so that everybody that was working on currencies was sitting together. Everybody that was working on commodities was sitting together. Everybody was working on corporate bonds was sitting together, rather than different silos, each with its own management, each with its own funding stream and reporting stream and whatever. And it lets us better serve the customer. And I think companies that do that do much better, and that is the way of the future.
So Michael, you took a risk in 1981 of starting Bloomberg LP, you took another risk of starting Bloomberg News, then you took a very different risk. You decided to enter the political maelstrom and run for mayor of New York. No previous political background. Why and how did it differ from the business world. I mean, you're much more exposed in a way. You're much more open to criticism. You have to have an extraordinarily thick skin. But what impelled you with all the success to decide you were going to take the risk of getting into politics, and not just politics, but anybody who knows New York knows that politics are extraordinarily tough there. So what was the thought there?
You know, I've always said if you want to go into government, first become a billionaire and then go into government. It's the reverse. I wanted to do it because 20 years was quite enough for the other owners and the customers and the employees of Bloomberg. A new guy can do it better, but you spend every day in a job learning what can't be done. And after 20 years, you know an awful lot of things that can't be done. New person comes in, they don't know anything that can't be done, and some of the things you were wrong on. And so the fact that they take a fresh look at it and start from scratch really can take the company to the next step. And the guys who were running the company while I was away really did a very good job. What do you go do? I was always annoyed at people that say these problems are intractable and they can't be fixed. I don't think that's true at virtually anything. I think you can always do something. And at one point, I wrote what's the rarest book in the world, an unautographed copy of Bloomberg by Bloomberg. But I wrote this book back in 1996, it was an autobiography. New York Times reviewed it and said how outrageous you wrote a favorable autobiography. What kind of a psychiatrist could help you if you wrote an unfavorable autobiography? Really stupid. Anyways, it looked like, in the book I said, I'm an executive. I make decisions. I like to deal with people. I'm not an investor. I'm not an analyst. I'm not a consultant. I'm not an educator. I make decisions. And it's a different skill set. And I think in government you need that kind of skill set. I think when you have an executive that doesn't have any executive, a senior person that doesn't have any executive experience, it shows. But I thought, I said, if I were in government, I'd be the president, the governor, or the mayor. Period. Didn't say anything else. My sister called me and said, oh, somebody just wrote in the paper you want to be mayor. She said they didn't think you're good enough to be president or governor. They didn't know, what she didn't know is the mayor's job in New York City is a better job than those other two by far, because the mayor's job, in New York City, you have the 5th largest army in the world. You have a budget of $75 billion, or maybe it's up to 85, 90 now. It's bigger than the GNP of half the countries in the world, much less big budgets. You've got 300,000 employees and, you know, all sorts of problems. You have your own foreign policy. New York City has more embassies and consulates than Washington, D.C. does because of the United Nations. So it's an international organization. And so I thought it'd be a great job, and I talked to some political people who said it's impossible to win because it's an overwhelmingly Democratic city, and you have nothing in common with them, with the electorate. And I said, well, how bad would it be? And these guys sat on the table and I said, well, you get a third of the votes, but not more. And I said, you know, and don't forget this, I said, well, that's not so bad. I mean, you'd rather win, but if you got a third of the votes, it says a lot of people really